Hello everyone, and welcome back to Haunting Words. If you found this video, you're probably looking for something to fall asleep, and I'm here to deliver. But before starting, take a moment to like this video and subscribe to the channel. Also, let me know where you're watching from and what time it is for you. This happened a few years ago, but even now, when I think about it, I feel that same uneasiness creeping up my spine. It's not just a memory, it's something that still lingers, like an unfinished conversation. I wasn't the kind of person who believed in ghosts or hauntings. Sure, I'd heard stories, but they were always just that, stories. Things you tell around a campfire or read about in books. I never thought I would be the one telling my own. At the time, I was in my mid-20s, living alone for the first time. It wasn't a luxury apartment or anything fancy, just a modest one-bedroom place on the second floor of an old building. The kind of place that had character, with creaky wooden floors and slightly uneven walls. It was affordable, and that was all that mattered. I had just started a new job that required long hours, and by the time I got home, all I wanted to do was eat, watch something mindless, and sleep. My routine was simple: wake up, go to work, come home, and repeat. Weekends were mostly for errands, laundry, and catching up on sleep. Nothing out of the ordinary. I wasn't the type to have people over often. I had friends, but they had their own lives, and honestly, I liked my space. The apartment itself was quiet. Too quiet sometimes. The kind of quiet where you can hear the faint hum of the refrigerator at night, the occasional drip of the bathroom faucet, and the distant sound of someone walking in the hallway outside. But even in that silence, I never felt uncomfortable. At least, not in the beginning. The building was old but well maintained. A lot of the tenants were older people who had lived there for years. There weren't many young people like me, which meant the hallways were mostly empty, and the parking lot was never crowded. The landlord was an older guy who lived on the ground floor, always wearing the same faded flannel shirts and moving slower than time itself. He wasn't chatty, but he was polite enough. My apartment had a small living room, a kitchenette, and a single bedroom with a window facing the alley behind the building. The view wasn't great, just a brick wall and some dumpsters, but at least it meant no one could see inside my place. The layout was simple, and I liked it that way. No extra space to fill with things I didn't need. Just a couch, a TV, a small dining table, and my bed. I remember the first few nights I stayed there, how peaceful it felt. I would fall asleep easily, exhausted from work, and wake up to sunlight streaming through the blinds. It felt like a fresh start, a place that was entirely mine. I didn't have to share it with anyone, didn't have to adjust to someone else's habits. It was just me. For the first month, everything was normal. The only noises were the ones I made, and the only shadows were the ones cast by my furniture. It was just a regular apartment in a regular building with regular people. But then, small things started happening. Things I brushed off at first. Things that didn't seem like much on their own. A light that I swore I turned off being on when I woke up, a cabinet door slightly open when I was sure I had closed it. My phone moving from the nightstand to the floor without me remembering dropping it. Nothing big. Nothing that made me feel unsafe. Just things I couldn't explain. At first, I thought maybe I was just too tired to notice these things happening. I'd come home exhausted, throw my stuff down, and barely pay attention to what I was doing before crashing on the couch. Maybe I was just being forgetful. Maybe I had left the light on. Maybe I had knocked my phone over in my sleep. It was easy to rationalize. But as the days went by, those little things started to add up. One night, I woke up around 2 a.m., feeling off. The room was dark, but I could see the faint glow of the streetlight filtering through the blinds. Everything was quiet. Too quiet. The kind of silence that made my ears ring. I shifted under the covers, trying to shake off the strange feeling, but then I noticed something. My bedroom door. Something about it wasn't right. It wasn't closed all the way. I always shut it before going to bed, always. But now it was slightly open, just a few inches. I stared at it for a long time, my mind racing through possible explanations. Maybe I hadn't latched it properly. Maybe a draft had moved it. Maybe I was overthinking. I got up, closed the door, and went back to bed. I told myself it was nothing. But it wasn't nothing. And that was only the beginning. The night I found my bedroom door open should have been the moment I started paying attention. But I didn't. I told myself it was nothing, just a mistake, just me being too tired to remember if I had closed it properly. And that's how I handled everything that followed. I explained it away. At first, the strange moments were easy to dismiss. A fork in the sink when I was sure I had left it on the counter. A chair slightly pulled out from the dining table when I hadn't sat there in days. A draft of cold air near my bed, even though the windows were shut tight. None of it felt big enough to be worth worrying about. But then, something happened that I couldn't ignore. It was a Thursday night. I remember that clearly because Thursdays were my worst work days, long, exhausting, and the kind where I'd come home barely able to keep my eyes open. That night was no different. I had kicked off my shoes, thrown my bag on the couch, microwaved something quick for dinner, and collapsed in bed before 10 p.m. Sometime later, I woke up suddenly. Not in the slow, groggy way you do when you've had a full night's sleep. No, this was immediate, like a switch had been flipped in my brain. My eyes snapped open, and my body tensed before I even knew why. The room was dark, the only light coming from the faint glow of the street lamp outside. I stayed still for a moment, listening. Silence! But something felt wrong. It wasn't just that I had woken up for no reason. It was the feeling that I hadn't been alone. That there had been a noise, something so quiet that I had only registered it in my sleep. I turned my head slightly, my breath slow and careful. My bedroom door was closed. I let out a breath. Maybe I was just paranoid from the other night. Maybe I had finally started spooking myself. Then I heard it. A soft, deliberate tap. It came from the other side of the door. My entire body froze. I wasn't dreaming. I wasn't imagining it. That sound was real, and it had come from right outside my bedroom. For a long moment, I didn't move. I barely breathed. My heart was pounding so hard I could feel it in my throat. I stared at the door, waiting, hoping that I had just misheard, that my mind was playing tricks on me. Tapped! Again. The exact same spot. My chest tightened. I tried to think of a logical explanation. Maybe something had fallen. Maybe it was the old pipes in the building. But no. It was too precise, too controlled. Like someone was standing right outside my door, tapping lightly, waiting for me to react. I didn't know what to do. A part of me wanted to throw the covers over my head like a kid, pretend it wasn't happening. But I wasn't a kid. I was a grown man, alone in an apartment, and something, was on the other side of that door. I swallowed hard and slowly reached for my phone on the nightstand. My fingers trembled as I unlocked it. The screen glowed in the darkness, casting strange shadows across the walls. I turned on the flashlight and aimed it at the door. Silence. I waited. A full minute passed. Nothing. I exhaled, forcing myself to sit up. My heart was still racing, but the logical side of my brain was trying to take control. Maybe it was just the building settling. Old wood shifts, makes noises. It lived here for months, and I had heard the occasional creak. This was probably no different. I got out of bed, my legs unsteady, and walked toward the door. My fingers hovered over the handle for a moment before I slowly turned it. The door swung open. I shined my phone's flashlight into the hallway. Nothing. The small apartment was just as I had left it. Dark, quiet, undisturbed. The front door was still locked. The windows were shut. Everything looked normal. But I couldn't shake the feeling that something had just been there, standing right outside my door, watching. I checked everything, looked under the bed, in the closet, even behind the shower curtain in the bathroom. I knew it was stupid, but I had to do it. I had to be sure. And yet, even after finding nothing, I still didn't feel safe. I barely slept that night. Every sound made my skin crawl. Every shadow made my chest tighten. The feeling of being watched never left. When morning finally came, I was exhausted. I had to drag myself out of bed, force myself through my routine, pretend I hadn't spent half the night staring at my bedroom door in fear. But even in daylight, something felt off. I told myself it had been a one-time thing, just a weird noise in an old building, just my mind playing tricks on me. I had probably been half asleep, misinterpreting something harmless. But later that day, when I came home from work, I noticed something strange. My bedroom door was open. I knew I had closed it that morning. I was certain. But now, it was slightly ajar. Not wide open. Just enough. Enough to make me stop in my tracks. Enough to send a chill through my body. I walked in slowly, checking every corner, every inch of my apartment. Nothing had been moved. Nothing was missing. The front door was still locked. But my bedroom door had opened on its own. Or something had opened it. For the next few days, I tried to push it out of my mind. I convinced myself that maybe I had forgotten to close my bedroom door that morning. Maybe the tapping at night had been nothing more than the apartment settling, an old building making old building noises. I told myself these things over and over, as if saying them enough times would make them true. But I knew they weren't, because the strange things didn't stop. They got worse. It started with the tapping. At first, it was just at my bedroom door. A few soft, deliberate knocks in the middle of the night. But then it spread. The first time I heard it coming from the walls, I thought it was just my neighbors. Thin walls, old pipes, things creaked and groaned all the time. But one night, as I lay in bed, I heard it again. This time, it came from inside my room. A faint, rhythmic scraping sound. I turned on my phone's flashlight and scanned the room, my pulse hammering in my ears. Nothing. Just my dresser, my desk, my chair in the corner, everything where it should be. But then the sound moved. It shifted along the wall, stopping right above my headboard. I sat up so fast I nearly fell out of bed. My skin was covered in goosebumps. My breath was shaky. I pressed my palm against the cold wall. For a second, the sound stopped. And then, tap, 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 right under my hand. I yanked my hand away as if the wall had burned me. My entire body went stiff, every muscle locking in place. I didn't sleep that night. The next morning, I checked the walls, looked for cracks, holes, anything that could explain the noise. Nothing. But that wasn't the worst part. That morning, when I left for work, I distinctly remembered locking my apartment door behind me, double-checking it, even tugging the handle to make sure. But when I came home that evening, the door was unlocked. I stood frozen in the hallway, staring at the handle. My stomach dropped. Had I forgotten to lock it? No, I was sure I had. I pushed the door open slowly, my heart pounding. The apartment was exactly how I had left it. No signs of forced entry, nothing missing or moved. But the air inside felt wrong, heavy, like I had just walked into a room where someone had been standing only moments before. I checked every corner, every closet, under the bed, nothing. But that night, the tapping didn't stop. The first time I heard them, I was in the shower. I had just lathered my hair when, over the sound of the water, I heard it soft, deliberate footsteps on the hardwood floor. I froze. My heart slammed against my ribs. The water continued running, but I didn't move. I knew what I had heard. Something was walking through my apartment. I reached out with a shaking hand and turned the water off. The bathroom went silent except for the drip, drip, drip of water from my hair. And then, a soft creak from the hallway. I stood there, dripping, my breath shallow. I slowly reached for the shower curtain and yanked it open. The bathroom door was closed, just like I had left it. But I knew I hadn't been alone just now. For the first time since all of this started, I felt real fear. Not just unease, not just paranoia. Fear. I quickly dried off, threw on some clothes, and stepped into the hallway. My phone's flashlight barely cut through the darkness. The apartment was quiet. Too quiet. I checked the front door. Locked. The bedroom? The kitchen? Everything was in place. But I felt it. That lingering presence. That heaviness in the air. And then something else happened. As I stood in the hallway, trying to catch my breath, my phone buzzed in my hand. A text from an unknown number. I hesitated before opening it. My fingers felt stiff, slow. Are you alone? I felt my stomach drop. My skin went ice cold. I stared at the screen, my pulse thundering in my ears. Before I could even react, another message popped up. Look behind you. I spun around so fast I nearly fell. My flashlight beam darted across the hallway. The bedroom door. The empty living room. The dark kitchen. No one was there. But I swear to God, for just a split second, I saw the shadow of something move in the corner of my vision. And then it was gone. That was the night I stopped ignoring what was happening. I started keeping track of the strange occurrences, writing them down in a notebook. What time they happened, where, how they made me feel. The tapping, the moving objects, the footsteps, everything. I even did research on the apartment building, searching for anything, old deaths, weird stories, anything that could explain what was happening. But there was nothing. No reports of hauntings, no murders, nothing unusual. Except for one thing. I found an old forum post from years ago, written by a previous tenant. It was buried deep in a thread about strange apartment experiences. If you ever feel like you're being watched, if you hear it tapping at your door, do not open it. That was all it said. No explanation, no follow-up. The user had never posted anything else. I sat there, staring at the screen, my hands sweating. Do not open it. I thought about the nights I had woken up to tapping, the times I had checked the hallway, looked behind the door, searched the apartment. Had I let it in? That night, I barely slept. I kept every light in the apartment on, every door closed, my phone next to me. But sleep eventually took over. And then, 3:12 a.m., I woke up to my bedroom door slowly creaking open. This time, I wasn't alone. 3:12 a.m. I don't know what woke me up first, the sound or the feeling. It was that oppressive, heavy weight in the air again. Like something had settled over the room, pressing against my chest, making it hard to breathe. The kind of pressure that makes every muscle in your body go stiff before your brain even has time to process why. But then I heard it. The slow, deliberate creak of my bedroom door swinging open. I had closed it. I was sure of it. I didn't move, didn't even breathe. Just lay there, my back against the mattress, eyes locked on the sliver of darkness beyond the doorway. My phone was on the nightstand beside me. I wanted to reach for it, to grab it, to turn on the flashlight. But I was frozen. My body refused to obey. The door kept opening, inch by inch. And then, in the silence, something shifted. Something moved in the darkness beyond the doorway. Not the kind of movement you catch from the corner of your eye and convince yourself was just your imagination. No, this was deliberate. Something stepped inside my room. I felt the weight in the air grow thicker, heavier. The temperature dropped, sending a wave of cold down my spine. A shadow, not from the hallway, but in my room, shifted just beyond the faint glow of my bedside lamp. It wasn't just darkness, it was deeper than darkness. A void where no light could touch. And then I heard it. A single, ragged breath. Not mine. Right next to my bed. I wanted to scream, to move, to run, but my body wouldn't respond. Every instinct screamed at me to do something, anything, but I couldn't. The air in the room felt wrong, thick, heavy, like something was pressing down on me, pinning me to the mattress. And then, the bed shifted. Not just a subtle creak. Something pressed down on the mattress, right next to my legs. I wanted to shut my eyes, but I couldn't. My gaze was locked on the darkness hovering just feet away from me. And then, it moved. Not quickly, not suddenly, but in slow, deliberate steps, inching closer. I could feel it. That cold, suffocating presence creeping over me, sinking into my skin, into my bones. A whisper of air brushed against my face, too close. I felt it leaning over me. Something was in my room. Something was watching me. And then, a low, distorted voice broke the silence. 2 words. "You're awake." Something inside me snapped. I lunged. My hand shot out, fumbling for my phone. The second my fingers wrapped around it, I turned on the flashlight and pointed it directly at the shadow. The second the light hit it, it wasn't there. The room was empty. My heart hammered so hard I thought I might pass out. My skin was clammy with sweat. My breath came in ragged gasps. But I knew what I had seen, what I had felt. I wasn't alone in that room. I never had been. The presence was still there. Even if I couldn't see it, I could feel it. And then my phone buzzed. A new text message. I swallowed hard and forced myself to look at the screen. The message was from the same unknown number as before. Turn around. My entire body went cold. I didn't want to. I didn't want to turn around. But something in me knew I had to. Slowly, painfully, I turned my head. My phone's flashlight beam cast long shadows across my bedroom walls. My closet door was slightly ajar. I stared. And then, something stared back. At first, I thought my eyes were playing tricks on me. That my fear had built up so much that my brain was making me see things. But I wasn't imagining it. Because the shadow inside my closet was breathing. It wasn't a trick of the light. It wasn't my clothes hanging in weird shapes. It was something else. And then, slowly, it moved. Not stepping forward, not lunging, just shifting, like it had been waiting. The room felt colder, the air thicker. I didn't blink. I couldn't blink. The thing in my closet wasn't a person. It wasn't a shadow. It was something else entirely. The darkness around it seemed to pull the light in, like a void swallowing everything near it. And then, it took a step forward. That was it. That was all I needed. I bolted. I didn't care about my phone. I didn't care about anything except getting out. I ran. Straight out of my bedroom, through the dark hallway, past the front door, out of the apartment. I didn't stop running until I was out in the street, gasping for breath, the cold night air hitting my sweat-covered skin like a slap. I turned back. My apartment window was dark. Nothing moved inside. But I knew it was still in there. And it had been waiting for me the whole time. I stood there, barefoot on the freezing pavement, my breath coming in sharp gasps. The streets were dead silent, no cars, no footsteps, no late-night sounds of life. Just the distant hum of streetlights and the winds rustling through the empty alleyways. I wasn't sure how long I stood there. A minute? 10? An hour? My body was still buzzing with adrenaline, my mind racing through what had just happened. The door, the breathing, the shadow in the closet, the voice. "You're awake." I shuddered. I turned back toward my apartment, my window still dark, the whole place looking just as normal as it always did, like nothing had happened. But I knew better. I couldn't go back inside. Not now. Maybe not ever. I reached into my pocket for my phone and realized it wasn't there. I had left it in my room. A fresh wave of panic crashed over me. My lifeline, my only connection to the outside world, was still sitting in that room with whatever the hell that thing was. I tried to think. Who could I call? Where could I go? I had friends, but none close enough to just show up at their place in the middle of the night without warning. My parents lived hours away. The only option I had was a cheap motel down the street. I took one last look at my apartment, my stomach twisting. I couldn't go back inside. Not after what I had just seen. I turned and started walking. The motel was the kind of place where the air smelled faintly of mildew, and the walls were so thin you could hear the person in the next room shifting in their bed. But I didn't care. I needed to be anywhere but my apartment. I locked the door, checked it twice, then sat on the edge of the bed, staring at the blank TV screen. I should have passed out from exhaustion. My body was drained. My brain was fried. But my mind refused to shut off. Every time I closed my eyes, I saw it. That thing in the closet. The way the darkness around it seemed to breathe. And the voice. "You're awake." What did it mean? Had it been watching me sleep? Was it always there, waiting for me to notice? A sick feeling crawled up my spine. Had it been there before tonight? I gripped my knees, trying to steady my breathing. There was no way I was going back there alone. The next morning, I called the only person I could trust with something like this, my old coworker, Eric. He was the type who always had an answer for everything, a rational explanation, no matter how weird things got. I met him at a coffee shop, still wearing the same clothes from the night before. "You look like hell," was the first thing he said. I ignored it. "I need you to come back to my apartment with me," I told him. "Just for a few minutes." Eric raised an eyebrow. "Why?" I hesitated. I had played the night over and over again in my head, but now, saying it out loud felt impossible. "If I tell you, you won't believe me," I said. Eric leaned back in his chair. "Try me." So I told him. Everything. The strange texts, the breathing, the feeling of something pressing into my bed, the door opening on its own, the shadow in the closet, and the voice. By the time I finished, Eric's usual cocky expression was gone. He just sat there, fingers drumming against the table. "Okay," he said finally. "Let's go." Standing in front of my door again made my skin crawl. I hesitated, my hand hovering over the doorknob. Eric nudged me. "You gonna open it or what?" I swallowed and turned the key. The door swung open. I half expected to feel that same suffocating presence the second I stepped inside. But the apartment was normal. No overturned furniture. No flickering lights. No sign that anything had ever been wrong. It was almost worse that way. Eric walked inside like it was nothing, looking around. "So, where's the big scary ghost?" I didn't answer. Instead, I walked toward my bedroom, heart pounding. I stepped inside. The air felt different. Not heavy, not freezing, just empty. Like whatever had been here was gone. Eric checked the closet, yanking the door open without hesitation. Nothing. Just my clothes, my shoes, my old cardboard boxes stacked in the corner. He turned to me. Dude, there's nothing here. I wanted to believe him. But then I noticed my phone, still sitting on my nightstand where I had left it. I picked it up with shaking hands and opened my messages. The last text was still there. Turn around. I showed it to Eric. His face paled a little, but he forced a shrug. Creepy. But that could be from anyone. I shook my head. I didn't give my number to anyone new. And the timing. Eric sighed. Look, I'm not saying you're lying. But maybe it was just a prank. Or you were half asleep. Your brain was messing with you. Maybe he was right. Maybe my exhaustion had made me see things that weren't there. But I couldn't shake the feeling. That deep, unsettling certainty. Something had been in that room with me. And whatever it was, it knew I saw it. Eric stayed with me for a couple of hours. Nothing happened. The place felt normal. Eventually, he convinced me to stay. I almost agreed. But then, as we were leaving the bedroom, I noticed something. The closet door. It was open again. Just a few inches. I had watched Eric close it. My stomach twisted into a knot. Eric must have seen the look on my face because he turned to follow my gaze. His expression shifted. I swear I shut that. I didn't say anything. Just walked over and pulled the door open. Still empty. Still nothing there. But when I turned back toward Eric, my stomach dropped. His eyes were locked on something behind me. I didn't want to turn around. I had to. I turned and froze. There, on the floor, lying at the threshold of my closet, was my phone, face down. It had been in my hand just seconds ago. A chill raced down my spine. Eric let out a nervous laugh, rubbing the back of his neck. Okay, that's weird. I bent down, heart hammering, and picked it up. The screen lit up. A new text. Unknown number. See you soon. I dropped the phone. I didn't go back inside after that. I packed a bag and left. I stayed with Eric for a week, then found a new apartment across the city. I never went back. I don't know what was in that apartment. I don't know if it was real or something I wasn't meant to understand. But one thing was clear. It knew I had seen it. And now, it knew me. It's been months since I left that apartment. Since I packed my bags, signed a new lease, and swore I would never set foot in that building again. I wish I could say I moved on. That it was just a strange, terrifying moment in my life, and now it's over. But that would be a lie. Some things don't just disappear. I've tried to convince myself that it was all in my head, that exhaustion, stress, and paranoia got the best of me. That there was never anything in that closet, never a presence watching me. But then, late at night, when I'm alone in my new place, I hear things. A faint shuffling sound in the hallway when I know no one's there. A creak of a door that should be closed. Sometimes, when I wake up in the middle of the night, I swear I feel something watching me from the shadows. The worst part? It follows me. I changed my number as soon as I moved, hoping that would be the end of it. That if whoever or whatever had sent me that last text couldn't reach me, I could pretend it never happened. But 3 weeks after settling into my new place, I woke up to a notification. One new message, unknown number. My whole body went cold. I stared at my phone, dreading what I was about to see. My hands trembled as I opened it. Still awake, I dropped the phone onto my bed. I knew, without a doubt, that it was the same unknown number. I wanted to believe it was some elaborate prank, that someone had found my new number, maybe even tracked me down just to mess with me. But how? I hadn't told anyone where I moved except for Eric. I deleted the message. blocked the number. For a while, it was quiet again. But then, the apartment started to feel wrong. Not haunted, not cursed, just wrong. Like something had settled in. Like the air was heavier than it should be. Like the corners of my vision were filled with something I wasn't supposed to see. One night, I woke up gasping for air. I had felt it again. The pressure. Not on my chest this time, but beside me. Like something was lying in bed with me. I refused to be alone anymore. I stayed at Eric's place whenever I could. I kept the lights on at night. I slept with my bedroom door open, just so I could see out into the hallway. Then, one night, I finally broke. It was 3 a.m. I was staring at my bedroom ceiling, too afraid to close my eyes. The apartment was silent, but I could feel it. That same, suffocating stillness. And then, a breath. Not mine. Not from the hallway. Right next to me. Slow, steady, patient. I turned my head so fast I nearly hurt myself. Nothing was there. The empty space beside me. The darkened corner of my room. The open doorway. But I knew it was still there. And it was waiting. I grabbed my keys, my wallet, my shoes, whatever I could, and left my apartment without looking back. I stayed at a hotel that night. The next day, I broke my lease. I didn't care about the money. I didn't care about the hassle. I just had to leave. Now, I live in a different city. I don't tell people where I live. I don't stay in one place too long. And yet, some nights, I wake up at exactly 3:12 a.m. I lie there, frozen, my heart pounding, my skin crawling with that same awful feeling. Like someone is watching. Like something knows where I am. And then, my phone buzzes. Every time, I hesitate. I don't want to look. I don't want to see. But I always do. And it's always the same. Unknown number. You're awake. This story happened over a decade ago, but I remember every detail as if it were yesterday. I was in my mid-20s, living alone for the first time in a small, older apartment on the outskirts of town. It wasn't much, just a one-bedroom place with a tiny kitchen and a hallway that led from the front door to the living room. It was my first real step into adulthood. No roommates, no shared expenses, just me and my quiet little space. The building itself had been around for decades. It wasn't run down, but there was something about it that always felt heavy. The walls held on to sounds, and at night, the creaks and groans of the structure settling had a way of making the silence feel oppressive. Still, I chalked it up to the quirks of an older place and never gave it much thought. I worked long hours at a small repair shop, fixing everything from broken appliances to worn-out engines. My job wasn't glamorous, but it paid the bills. Most days, I came home exhausted, heated up some leftovers, and watched TV until I fell asleep on the couch. It was a simple routine, and I liked it that way. At the time, I was dating someone. Let's call her Nina. She lived a few miles away and spent the occasional weekend at my place. She always joked about how my hallway freaked her out. "It's too dark," she'd say. "Even with the light on, it feels like something is watching you." I laughed it off. It was just a hallway after all. Nothing special. The apartment complex itself wasn't anything remarkable. A 2-story brick building with a handful of tenants who mostly kept to themselves. My neighbors were polite, but distant. I rarely saw them except in passing. The guy across from me, an older man with a permanent scowl, barely acknowledged me, while the woman downstairs always seemed too busy wrangling her 3 kids to stop and chat. The only real interactions I had were with the building's maintenance guy, Tom, a burly man in his 50s who always smelled like motor oil. He was friendly enough, always willing to help if something needed fixing. But even he had a strange way of talking about the building. "This place has its quirks," he once said while unclogging my kitchen sink. "Some things you just get used to." I didn't press him on what he meant, but looking back, I probably should have. Life was uneventful for the first few months. I settled into my routine, and nothing seemed out of place. But there was one thing I couldn't ignore: the hallway light. No matter how many times I replaced the bulb, it always flickered. Not constantly, just enough to be noticeable. At first, I blamed faulty wiring, but even when Tom checked it, he found nothing wrong. "Must be the fixture," he shrugged. "These old buildings, you know." I let it go. It was annoying, but not worth making a fuss over. Besides, I had bigger things to worry about: bills, work, and keeping my old truck from falling apart. It wasn't until Nina stopped staying over that I started paying attention to the little things. She claimed she didn't like the way the apartment felt at night. "It's not you," she assured me. "I just don't sleep well here." She never outright said she was scared, but I could tell something was bothering her. I started noticing things too. Nothing major, just small, almost dismissible oddities. A glass I swore I left on the counter would be in the sink. The bathroom door, which I always left slightly open, would be shut in the morning. I blamed exhaustion, memory lapses, anything but the nagging feeling that something was off. The hallway, though, that was different. I worked late one night and got home around midnight. I remember stepping inside and immediately feeling a chill, not the kind from cold air, but the kind that sinks beneath your skin. My apartment wasn't big, but in that moment, it felt endless, the walls stretching just beyond what my eyes could grasp. I locked the door behind me and tossed my keys onto the counter, their familiar clatter grounding me for a moment. I turned toward the hallway, ready to head to my bedroom, when I saw it, just for a second. A shadow, not my own, not cast from any object in the room. It was just there, a dark figure standing at the far end of the hallway, where the light barely reached. I blinked, and it was gone. My heart pounded against my ribs. I stood frozen, staring down the empty hallway, waiting for something, anything, to move. Nothing did. The apartment was silent, save for the faint hum of the refrigerator. I told myself I was just tired. Maybe my eyes were playing tricks on me. I shook it off, walked to my room, and shut the door behind me. I didn't sleep well that night. It was the first time I felt something in that apartment that I couldn't explain. After that first glimpse of the shadow, I did everything I could to convince myself it was just my imagination, a trick of the light. Maybe I was just exhausted from working too many hours. I told myself all the things people say when they don't want to believe something is wrong. But the feeling lingered. Over the next few days, I couldn't shake the sense that I wasn't alone in my apartment. It wasn't anything I could put my finger on, just a heavy awareness that made the air feel thick, like walking into a room where someone had just been arguing. I started leaving the TV on at night, keeping some noise in the background to make the silence less oppressive. Then, something happened that I couldn't explain away. It was a Saturday night, and I had just gotten home from running errands. My arms were full, bags of groceries, a 6-pack of soda, and some things for the apartment. I kicked the door shut behind me, set the bags down on the counter, and started putting things away. That's when I heard it. A faint thump. I froze. It had come from the hallway. The same hallway where I had seen the shadow. I stayed perfectly still, my back to the hall, listening. Nothing. No follow-up sound. No footsteps. Just the soft hum of the refrigerator and my own breathing. I turned around slowly, expecting, what, exactly? Someone standing there. The shadow again? But the hallway was empty. I let out a breath and shook my head. Probably the neighbors. The walls were thin, and I'd heard muffled sounds through them before. That had to be it. Still, when I walked past the hallway to get to my bedroom, I felt my skin prickle. I ignored it, turned on the bedroom light, and closed the door behind me. That night, I had the strangest dream. I was standing in my apartment, but something was wrong. The layout was the same, but the walls felt stretched, like the entire place had been pulled at the seams. The hallway was longer, darker, and at the far end, just beyond the reach of the flickering light, something was standing there. I couldn't see its face. I couldn't move. I woke up gasping, drenched in sweat. My room was silent, but that sense of wrongness from the dream clung to me. I sat up, rubbing my face, trying to shake it off. Just a nightmare, nothing more. But when I glanced toward my closed bedroom door, I saw something that made my breath catch in my throat. The hallway light was on. I knew I had turned it off before bed. I stared at the glow beneath the door, heart pounding. Maybe I had forgotten. Maybe I had left it on without realizing. But I had checked. I always checked. I swung my legs over the bed and stood up, every nerve in my body screaming at me to stay put. But I couldn't ignore it. I had to see. I reached for the doorknob, hesitated, then turned it slowly. The door creaked as I pushed it open. The hallway stretched before me, looking exactly as it always did, narrow, dim, with that faulty light flickering near the end. Nothing was there. No movement. No shadow. Just my empty apartment. I exhaled and ran a hand through my hair. "You're losing it," I muttered to myself. But as I reached for the light switch, I noticed something that sent ice down my spine. The hallway closet door, the one I always kept shut, was open. Just a few inches, but open enough for darkness to seep through the crack. I hadn't touched that closet in days. I stood frozen, my pulse roaring in my ears. The air felt thick, heavy, like the moment before a thunderstorm. I wanted to close the door, to shut it tight and lock it, but my feet refused to move. Something was watching me. I could feel it. The sensation crawled up my spine, pressing against my skin like invisible fingers. Then, the light above me flickered once, twice, and went out. I spun, fumbling for the bedroom light switch, and slammed the door shut behind me. My chest heaved. I told myself to calm down, to breathe. I didn't sleep the rest of the night. The next morning, I forced myself to check the hallway. The light worked fine again, as if nothing had happened. The closet door was shut. I stood there for a long time, staring at it, trying to figure out if I had just imagined the whole thing. Maybe I had. Maybe stress was getting to me. But I couldn't ignore the fact that from that night on, the hallway always felt wrong. Like it was waiting. After that night, things only got worse. The hallway no longer just felt wrong, it became a source of dread. Every time I walked past it, a chill ran down my spine, like stepping into a place I wasn't supposed to be. At first, I tried ignoring it. I told myself it was all in my head. But then the noises started. Soft, almost imperceptible at first. A faint creak, like someone shifting their weight on the floorboards. A quiet tap, as if fingers were drumming against the wall. At first, I thought it was the pipes, the apartment settling, anything but what I knew, deep down, was happening. But when I started waking up to my closet door open, every single night, I couldn't ignore it anymore. One night, I decided to test something. Before bed, I double-checked the closet door, making sure it was completely shut. I even wedged a chair against it, just to be sure. Then I set my phone up on my nightstand, recording. I went to sleep uneasy, but nothing woke me during the night. No dreams. No sounds. For the first time in weeks, I actually got some rest. When I woke up the next morning, I almost laughed at myself, feeling stupid for being so paranoid. Then I checked my phone. The recording was nearly 6 hours long. I scrubbed through the video quickly, expecting to see nothing but the dim glow of my nightlight. But at around 3:12 a.m., something changed. The room was silent, still. Then, without warning, the closet door moved. Not a slow creak, not a gradual shift. It snapped open, like someone yanked it from the inside. The chair blocking it barely even wobbled. It was as if whatever was inside had no regard for obstacles. The video ended with my sleeping form, completely unaware. My blood ran cold. I stared at the screen, replaying that moment over and over, searching for some logical explanation. Air pressure, a shift in the foundation, but nothing could explain how violently that door had been pulled open. I deleted the video, not because I didn't believe it, but because I did. That night, I didn't sleep. I sat up in bed with the lamp on, staring at the closet, waiting. But nothing happened. No noises, no movement. The silence was worse. It felt like the apartment was waiting for me to let my guard down. The next few nights, I avoided my bedroom as much as possible. I stayed in the living room, keeping the TV on, drowning out the quiet. But it didn't help. Things started moving on their own. My keys would disappear from the kitchen counter and show up on the floor in my bedroom. The cabinet doors in the bathroom would be open in the morning when I knew I had shut them. My bedroom light flickered at random, even though the bulb was new. And then there were the footsteps. At first, I only heard them faintly, late at night, when everything was still. A slow, deliberate shuffle in the hallway. I told myself it was the neighbors. The walls were thin. Maybe someone had trouble sleeping and paced at odd hours. But then I heard them right outside my bedroom door. Soft, measured steps, stopping just beyond the wood. I held my breath, gripping my blanket so tightly my knuckles ached. The room was dark except for the dim glow of my nightstand lamp, casting faint shadows on the ceiling. I didn't move. Neither did whatever was outside my door. Then, a knock. Not loud, not frantic, just a single, deliberate tap. I wanted to tell myself it was my imagination, that my mind was playing tricks on me after everything that had been happening. But then it happened again. Tap! I sat up slowly, heart hammering. I could feel the weight of something on the other side of the door, a presence so heavy it made the air feel thick. I reached for my phone with trembling hands, opening the flashlight. The moment the beam hit the door, the footsteps retreated. Not in a panicked rush, but in that same slow, deliberate shuffle. I threw the blankets off and lunged for the door, yanking it open, shining my flashlight into the hallway. Nothing. The apartment was silent. But as I swept the beam across the hallway, something caught my eye. The closet door was open, wider than ever before, and the darkness inside. It felt deeper than it should have been, like the closet had become something else entirely. I stepped back, slammed my bedroom door shut, and locked it. That night, I didn't sleep at all. By this point, I knew I needed to do something. This wasn't just paranoia. It wasn't my imagination. Something was wrong with my apartment, and I needed to understand what. I started researching the building. It was old, built sometime in the 1950s, but there were no reports of anything strange happening. No deaths. No stories. Then I checked the land. That's when I found something. Decades before the apartments were built, the land had been home to a boarding house that burned down in the late 1800s. There were no detailed records, but one article mentioned that a man, an unnamed tenant, had gone missing from the property. The fire had destroyed any chance of finding out what had happened to him. That night, as I sat on my couch reading, a sharp noise cut through the silence. A loud, scraping sound. My stomach twisted. It was coming from the hallway. I stood, heart pounding, and stepped toward the sound. The hallway was empty, but the scraping noise continued. Then I saw it. The closet door. It was dragging itself open, slowly, as if something on the other side was pulling it. I backed away, breathing hard. The air in the apartment felt suffocating, like I was standing in a sealed room. Then, a shape. Dark, just barely visible in the shadows. It stood just inside the closet, tall and wrong, as if it didn't quite fit in this world. It didn't move. It didn't breathe. But it was looking at me. I stumbled back, nearly tripping over my own feet. The moment I turned on the hallway light, it was gone. The closet door stood open, empty. But I knew now. Something had been in there. Watching. Waiting. That night, I knew I couldn't ignore it anymore. Whatever was in my apartment wasn't just playing games. It was getting bolder. The closet door, the footsteps, the overwhelming sense of being watched. It had all been leading to something. And now, I was going to find out what. I sat in the living room with every light in the apartment turned on. The TV was playing some random show, volume low, just enough to keep the silence from swallowing me whole. My phone was in my lap, my fingers gripping it so tightly they ached. I had already opened my camera app, ready to hit record at the first sign of anything. But nothing happened. Midnight passed. Then 1 a.m. At 2:37 a.m., I heard it. A slow, deliberate creak from the hallway. I turned my head toward the sound, my breath shallow. My bedroom door was slightly ajar, just enough for me to see a sliver of darkness beyond it. The closet was in there, waiting. I swallowed hard. Every instinct in me screamed to leave, to pack my things and run, but I was done running. I was done pretending this wasn't real. I pushed myself to my feet, my knees weak, and stepped toward the hallway. Another creak. Closer this time. My hands were clammy, my pulse hammering so hard I could feel it in my throat. Step by step, I moved toward my bedroom, the soft glow of my nightstand lamp barely illuminating the space. The closet door was wide open, but that wasn't what made me stop. There was something inside. A shadow stood in the center of the closet, darker than the blackness around it. Its shape was human-like, tall, unnaturally still, but its edges weren't defined. It was shifting, warping, like smoke that refused to dissipate. And then it moved. A slow, jerky step forward. The second I saw it shift, my chest tightened. My body screamed at me to run, but I was frozen. Then it spoke. Not in words. Not in anything I could truly understand. It was inside my head. A whisper, not in my ears, but in my mind. A feeling, an emotion, a pressure that made my skull feel like it was being squeezed from the inside. You let me in. I gasped, stumbling backward. My phone slipped from my grip and hit the floor with a dull thud, but I barely noticed. My vision swam, my knees almost giving out beneath me. It took another step. The pressure in my head grew unbearable, an overwhelming sense of wrongness pressing against my skull. It wasn't just looking at me. It was inside me. Memories flashed through my mind that weren't mine. A burning house, a man screaming, a dark room filled with whispers. Then something colder, a presence reaching for me. You see me now. I gasped as my body finally broke free from the paralysis. I lurched backward, slamming into the hallway wall. The thing in the closet surged forward, faster than before, its shifting form expanding as if it were trying to step into my world. The lamp flickered. The room tilted. I did the only thing I could. I ran. I bolted from the room, my feet barely hitting the floor as I sprinted for the front door. My hands fumbled at the lock, my pulse thundering in my ears. Behind me, the air changed. The apartment felt like it was warping, twisting in on itself. The very space around me seemed to bend, as if reality itself was rejecting whatever had just stepped out of that closet. I wrenched the door open and threw myself into the hallway outside my apartment. The moment I crossed the threshold, everything stopped. The air returned to normal. The lights in my apartment stopped flickering. The overwhelming sense of wrongness was gone. I turned, gasping for breath. The door to my apartment stood wide open. The hallway beyond was silent, untouched. But I knew if I stepped back inside, it would be waiting for me. I shut the door and ran. I spent the night at a friend's place, refusing to go back. I didn't tell them what happened. I couldn't. There was no way to explain it without sounding insane. The next morning, I called my landlord and told him I was moving out. I didn't care about breaking my lease. I packed up my things in the daylight, moving fast, never letting my back face the hallway for too long. By the time I left, I could still feel it. Watching. Waiting. And as I locked the door for the last time, I realized something terrifying. It had never needed to enter my world, because I had already let it into me. I didn't stop driving until I was miles away from that apartment. The morning sun was rising, turning the sky soft shades of orange and pink, but it didn't bring me any comfort. My hands were still shaking on the steering wheel, my mind replaying everything that had happened over and over. The voice, the shifting form in the closet, the overwhelming pressure in my head. You let me in. No matter how much I tried to push those words away, they stuck with me. The worst part? I didn't even know what it meant. I moved into a different apartment the very next week. It was smaller, older, and in a different part of the city, but I didn't care. All I wanted was to be away from that place, from whatever I had invited in, whether I meant to or not. The first few nights in my new place, I barely slept. Every time I closed my eyes, I half expected to wake up and see that closet door cracked open, that shifting blackness waiting for me. But nothing happened. Days passed, then weeks, and slowly I started to convince myself that it was over, that I was safe. Until one night. It was late, and I had finally started to feel like my life was going back to normal. I was lying in bed, scrolling through my phone, when I felt it. That pressure. It wasn't as strong as before, not the crushing force that had nearly knocked me over in my old apartment. But it was there. A faint, almost imperceptible weight in the back of my skull. I sat up, my pulse spiking. My room was dark except for the dim glow of my phone screen. I scanned the space, my heart pounding. Nothing. I tried to shake it off, telling myself I was just paranoid, that my mind was playing tricks on me. But as I lay back down, I saw something that made my stomach drop. My closet door. It was cracked open. I was sure I had closed it before getting into bed. I stared at it, frozen. The room was completely silent, but the air had changed. It felt wrong. Not as bad as before, but enough to make my skin prickle. Enough to tell me that I hadn't truly escaped. Whatever had been in my old apartment hadn't been bound to that place. It had followed me. I spent the next few days in a haze, unsure of what to do. I considered reaching out to a priest, a paranormal investigator, anyone who might be able to explain what was happening to me. But how was I supposed to tell them? Hey, I think I let something into my life, and now I want to leave. I started researching. Late nights spent digging through forums, reading about hauntings, possessions, entities that attached themselves to people instead of places. Most of the stories were eerily similar. People who had encountered something unknown, only for it to latch onto them. People who felt something inside their own minds, whispering, pressing against their thoughts. And the worst part, most of them never found a way to get rid of it. I tried to ignore it. I really did. But no matter where I went, no matter what I did, the feeling never completely left. It wasn't every night. Some nights I slept soundly, with no sense of anything watching me. But other nights I'd wake up gasping, heart racing, my body drenched in sweat. The closet door would be open, or I'd hear faint creaks in the hallway, or I'd feel that presence, not as strong as before, but lingering, waiting. And then, one night, I heard it again. That voice. But this time, it didn't speak in full words. It just laughed. A low, distant chuckle that wasn't coming from outside. It was inside my head. That was the moment I realized the truth. I hadn't escaped at all. I don't know how to explain it, but I've come to accept something I never thought I would. This thing, whatever it is a part of my life now. I spent months trying to run, trying to deny it, trying to believe that if I ignored it long enough, it would go away. But it never did. Some nights, I sleep without any issues. Other nights, I wake up in a cold sweat, my pulse pounding in my ears, feeling that weight pressing on my thoughts. The closet door still opens on its own sometimes. The air in my apartment still shifts from time to time, growing heavy with something unseen. And the worst part, I don't always feel afraid anymore. That might be the most unsettling thing of all. I don't talk about it with anyone. The few times I tried, I saw the looks on their faces, the disbelief, the awkward smiles, the subtle way they distanced themselves from me afterward. No one wants to hear about something like this. So I stopped mentioning it. I keep the lights on at night. I avoid mirrors in the dark. I never sleep with the closet door open, even if I know it won't make a difference. And sometimes, when I lie awake at night, I feel something just at the edge of my mind. Waiting. Watching. I used to think it wanted something from me, that it was trying to get in, trying to take something. But now, I'm not so sure. Because some nights, I wonder, what if I already let it in? And what if it never left? It started as just another work trip. Nothing out of the ordinary, nothing particularly exciting. Just a week of conferences, client meetings, and the usual corporate small talk that drained the life out of me. The company had booked my stay at a fairly standard hotel, not a luxurious 5-star place, but not a rundown roadside motel either. It was the kind of place where the carpet smelled faintly of cleaning chemicals, and the front desk clerk smiled just enough to seem polite, but not enough to seem friendly. I arrived late in the afternoon, rolling my suitcase through the automatic doors, greeted by the artificial coolness of the lobby air conditioning. The receptionist, a woman in her mid-40s with tired eyes and a forced smile, handed me my key card. "You're in room 709. Elevators are to your left," she said without much enthusiasm. The ride-up was quiet. No one else was in the elevator, which suited me fine. I just wanted to drop my bags, grab some food, and call it a night. The hallway on the 7th floor was dimly lit, the kind of yellowish lighting that made everything look slightly older than it actually was. My room was at the end of the hall. I slid the key card in, heard the familiar beep, and pushed the door open. The room was fine. Beige walls, a neatly made bed with too many pillows, a small desk against the wall with an outdated office chair, and a TV mounted across from the bed. A single window overlooked the city below, the glow of streetlights casting long shadows across the carpet. I threw my bag onto the bed and kicked off my shoes, stretching out after the long drive. The silence of the room was almost unsettling at first, too quiet, like the walls absorbed all sound. No street noise, no voices from other rooms, just stillness. The first thing I did was check the bathroom, not because I was paranoid, but because I always had this weird habit of making sure everything was in place before settling in. The mirror was a little streaky, the shower curtain was half drawn, and the vent above the toilet made a soft humming noise. Other than that, everything looked fine. After washing my face and changing into a t-shirt and sweatpants, I ordered some takeout from a nearby restaurant and flipped through the TV channels while waiting for my food to arrive. Nothing interesting, just the usual hotel cable, some old sitcom reruns, a news broadcast, and a movie I had already seen 100 times. By the time the food arrived, I was already feeling the weight of exhaustion creeping in. I ate while scrolling through my phone, mindlessly checking emails and texts until my eyes started to blur. I turned off the TV, brushed my teeth, and crawled into bed, ready to let sleep take over. And that's when I heard it. A voice! Not loud, not distinct, just a faint murmur coming from somewhere in the room. I froze, my body tensing under the sheets. At first, I thought it was coming from outside, maybe someone in the hallway. But no, it was closer. It was coming from the vent. Lying there in the dim glow of the bedside lamp, I held my breath, straining to listen. The voice coming from the vent was soft, muffled, like someone was speaking just on the other side of the wall. At first, I thought it might be a neighboring room. Maybe thin walls, someone on a late-night phone call, or the television playing at a low volume. I turned my head toward the vent, trying to make out the words. But they weren't words. They were whispers. Not quite a conversation, not quite gibberish. Just a steady, hushed murmuring that rose and fell in rhythm, like someone speaking just below the threshold of comprehension. I sat up, swinging my legs over the side of the bed, suddenly alert. The sound wasn't coming from the walls. It was from the air vent directly above the desk, one of those standard hotel room vents with slatted metal grates, positioned just high enough that it'd have to stand on the chair to get a better look. A weird, uneasy feeling settled in my stomach. I glanced at my phone, checking the time. 11:42 p.m. Too late for housekeeping. Too early for someone to be awake, having a normal conversation in another room. I hesitated, debating whether I should ignore it and just go to sleep. But the sound wasn't stopping. If anything, it was getting clearer. And then, for the briefest moment, I swore I heard my name. I shot up from the bed so fast that I nearly knocked over the bedside lamp. My pulse thumped in my ears, drowning out the faint hum of the vent. I stood there, heart hammering, waiting, listening. Nothing. The whispering had stopped. The room was silent again, except for the low mechanical hum of the air conditioning unit in the corner. I exhaled sharply, shaking my head. Maybe I was just tired, my mind playing tricks on me after a long day of travel. Still, I grabbed the desk chair, dragging it beneath the vent. Climbing up, I peered through the slats, expecting what? I wasn't sure. Maybe to see a loose panel, a trick of acoustics carrying sounds from another room. But I saw nothing, just darkness. I stayed there for a minute, listening. The vent was completely silent now, as if whatever had been making the noise had sensed my presence and gone still. Climbing back down, I checked the thermostat, lowering the temperature a few degrees in case the noise had been a mechanical issue with the ventilation system. Then, feeling slightly ridiculous, I pressed my ear against the wall beside the vent, listening for any sign of movement in the neighboring room. Silence! Shaking off the unease, I climbed back into bed, determined to ignore whatever weirdness had just happened. The mind plays tricks, especially in unfamiliar places. Hotels were strange like that, temporary, sterile, filled with traces of 100 people before me. I closed my eyes and forced myself to relax. And then, just as I was drifting off, I heard it again. The whispering. But this time, it was closer. And it was laughing. The whispering had returned, but this time, it wasn't a distant, muffled sound trapped in the vents. It was closer. Too close. And then, the laughter. It wasn't loud, but it wasn't exactly soft either. It was just there. Low, breathy, unsettling. The kind of laugh someone might give when they're standing in the dark, watching, waiting for you to notice them. I sat up so fast that my pulse roared in my ears. The room felt colder than before, the artificial hum of the air conditioner suddenly too loud. My eyes darted toward the vent. It was impossible, just a metal grate in the wall. There was no space for anything to be in there. But the sound had definitely come from it. I grabbed my phone, fumbling for the flashlight. The second the beam hit the vent, the whispering stopped again. I didn't move. I barely even breathed. The seconds dragged on, my heartbeat a frantic rhythm against my ribs. I stood up, gripping the phone so tight my knuckles turned white. Slowly, I approached the vent. The light from my phone cast long shadows on the beige walls, warping the edges of the slats. I raised my free hand, hesitating for just a moment before pressing my fingers against the metal grate. Cold. Colder than it should have been. A chill ran down my spine. The air conditioning wasn't on high enough for the metal to feel like ice. I pressed my ear against it, heart hammering. Nothing. No whispering. No laughter. No breathing. I exhaled sharply, trying to shake off the tension coiling in my muscles. Maybe it was just faulty ductwork, something shifting as the air circulated. Maybe my brain was still wired from travel exhaustion, hearing things that weren't there. I turned away, rubbing my hands over my face. I needed sleep. That was all. Just sleep. But the second I stepped away, a sound. Not a whisper. Not laughter. Something moved inside the vent. I spun around so fast I nearly tripped over my own feet. My phone flashlight wobbled in my hand, the beam flickering across the vent's slats. There was something inside. I stared, frozen, my mind struggling to process what I had just heard. It had been faint, but undeniable, a shuffling like fabric brushing against metal. I took a step closer, then another. My breath came in short, uneven bursts. Every instinct told me to walk away, to get out of the room, to go downstairs and demand a different one. But I didn't move. Instead, I reached out. Fingers trembling, I curled them around the edges of the vent's metal cover. With a quick tug, I tested if it was loose. It wasn't. The screws held firm, unmoving. That should have been comforting. It wasn't. I took a step back, running a hand through my hair. There was no way anything was inside. The vents were too narrow, too small for anything larger than a rat to move through. And besides, the hotel was clean, not the kind of place that would have a rodent problem. Then what the hell had I heard? I grabbed my phone and opened the camera. If I couldn't get the vent open, maybe I could at least see inside. I turned on the flash, held my breath, and slowly raised the phone to the vent. I angled the lens toward the slats, my pulse thudding so loud it drowned out every other sound. Click! The camera snapped a photo. I pulled the phone back and opened the image. At first, I saw nothing but darkness. Then, a shape. A shadow, just barely visible in the blackness of the vent. My stomach dropped. It wasn't dust. It wasn't a trick of light. It was a shape. A face. Not a normal face, just the suggestion of one. Eyes, or where eyes should be a sliver of something pale against the darkness. My hands went cold. I dropped the phone. It hit the carpet with a dull thud, the screen casting an eerie glow across the room. I scrambled to pick it up, my fingers shaking so badly that I almost fumbled it again. The second I lifted it, a knock. not from the door. From inside the vent. I stumbled backward, knocking into the desk. My breathing was shallow, my chest tight with a rising panic. The knock had been deliberate, sharp, precise. Like someone on the other side of a wall, testing to see if it'd respond. I grabbed my bag, yanking it onto the bed. My brain had already made the decision before my body caught up. I was leaving. I didn't care if it was past midnight. I didn't care if the front desk thought I was crazy. I zipped up the bag, my hands moving on autopilot, when a voice from inside the vent. Clear, direct, and it said my name. I bolted. I didn't stop to think. I didn't stop to breathe. My body moved on instinct, fueled by sheer panic. I yanked my bag off the bed, gripping it so tight my knuckles ached. My feet barely felt the carpet as I rushed toward the door, heart hammering like it was trying to break free from my chest. I fumbled with the lock, my fingers slipping against the cold metal handle. Come on, come on. I yanked it down, expecting resistance, expecting. The door swung open too easily. The hallway was empty. My breath came in sharp, uneven bursts as I stood there, staring out into the dimly lit corridor. The air was still, heavy, like the whole floor was holding its breath. For a split second, I hesitated. Was I overreacting? Was I just exhausted, letting my mind warp normal sounds into something sinister? Then, the knock came again. But this time, it wasn't from the vent. It came from inside the room. I turned so fast I nearly lost my balance. My vision blurred with the rush of movement, my stomach twisting with dread. The vent cover was hanging open. It had been screwed shut. I knew that. I had checked it myself. But now, the cover dangled loosely, as if someone or something had pushed it from the inside. The screws lay scattered across the floor. The air in the room had changed. It felt thick, charged, like the silence was pressing against my skin. The light from the bedside lamp flickered once, twice, then went out. And then I saw it. At first, I thought my eyes were playing tricks on me. The darkness inside the vent looked wrong, too deep. Like the blackness had a weight to it, stretching beyond the confines of the wall. And then it moved. A shape barely distinguishable from the shadows shifted inside the vent. A slithering, unnatural motion. My body locked up, every muscle tensed in terror. Then something crawled out. It wasn't fast. It didn't lunge or burst forward. It crawled, slowly, methodically, as if it knew I couldn't move, couldn't scream, couldn't do anything but watch in horror. The first thing I saw were the fingers. They curled around the edge of the vent, long and thin, stretching unnaturally as they gripped the metal frame. The skin was pale, almost translucent, with dark veins twisting beneath the surface. Then came the arms. Too long, too thin. The joints moved strangely, bending in ways that weren't natural. My breathing hitched as the face emerged. It wasn't human, not entirely. The features were distorted, stretched, as if something had tried to mimic a human face, but hadn't quite figured it out. The eyes were hollow, dark pits that seemed to pull the light from the room. And the mouth, it was smiling. The thing dragged itself further out of the vent, its body twisting unnaturally, joints popping with each movement. It was too big to fit inside the walls, and yet it had been there, waiting, watching. It tilted its head at me, as if studying my reaction. Then, in a voice that should not exist, it whispered, "You heard me." That was all it said, and that was enough. I ran. I don't remember how I made it down the hallway. My legs moved on their own, my body screaming for escape. The air was thick, suffocating, pressing against me like something unseen was trying to pull me back. I reached the elevator, slammed the button over and over. The doors didn't open fast enough. I turned, my breath ragged, expecting to see nothing. The hallway was empty. No shadowy figure. No crawling limbs. No twisted face staring back at me. But I knew it was still there. Watching. Waiting. And it knew my name. The elevator doors slid open with an agonizing slowness, like they were moving through molasses. I practically threw myself inside, slamming the lobby button over and over. My hands were shaking so badly that I almost missed. The doors began to close. For a split second, I thought I saw something at the far end of the hallway. A shadow stretching unnaturally, shifting in ways that weren't possible. But before my brain could fully register it, the doors sealed shut, trapping me in the small metal box. I pressed myself against the cool elevator wall, heart hammering so violently I could feel it in my throat. The air inside felt suffocating. Too still, too quiet. The numbers on the panel ticked downward. 8, 7, 6. I forced myself to breathe. In through my nose, out through my mouth. It's over. You're getting out. Just a few more seconds. 5, 4. And then the elevator stopped. Not at a floor. Not at the lobby. It just stopped. The overhead light flickered once, then went dark. My stomach clenched. I reached out blindly, fingers fumbling for the emergency button. My breathing turned shallow. And then, a knock. Not from the doors. From inside the elevator. Somewhere above me. I looked up. The ceiling panel was slightly ajar. A small sliver of darkness peeked through. And then, through the gap, something moved. I didn't have time to think. I pounded the emergency button, my voice raw as I screamed into the tiny speaker. Help! Get me out of here. Silence. Then, scraping. A slow, deliberate sound, like nails dragging across metal. It came from above, moving toward the opening. I backed into the corner, pressing myself flat against the cold wall. It's in here with me. The scraping stopped. For a few excruciating seconds, there was nothing but silence. Then, a whisper, right above me. I didn't understand the words. They were soft, distant, like they were being spoken underwater. But the tone was something wrong. Something that made my insides turn to ice. I slammed my fist against the emergency speaker. Help, please. The elevator lurched. The sudden motion sent me sprawling to the floor. My breath caught as the lights flickered back on, and the numbers resumed their descent. 3, 2, 1. The doors slid open, revealing the empty, sterile lobby. The moment I saw it, I scrambled to my feet and ran. The night clerk barely had time to register me before I was at the front desk. I need to check out. Now. The clerk, an older man with tired eyes, gave me a wary look. Sir, it's 3 in the morning. Are you sure? Yes, I snapped, my voice barely holding together. I'm sure. I didn't wait for him to argue. I tossed my room key onto the counter, not caring if I got my deposit back, and headed straight for the front doors. The night air hit me like a slap to the face. Cold, sharp, real. I rushed to my car, throwing my bag into the passenger seat. My fingers fumbled with the keys. I couldn't stop shaking. When the engine roared to life, I didn't look back at the hotel. I couldn't, because I knew if I did, I would see something staring back at me. I drove for hours. I didn't care where I was going, just as long as it was far away from that hotel. My hands stayed tight on the wheel, my knuckles aching, the radio off because I couldn't stand the thought of hearing another voice. The sky slowly lightened as the sun began to rise, soft hues of gray and gold bleeding into the horizon. But it didn't bring me relief. Not really. Because I knew what I saw. I knew what I heard. And worst of all, I knew it wasn't over. Even now, sitting here in my apartment, writing this down, I can still feel it. That lingering sense that something followed me. That somewhere, just out of sight, it's still watching. I haven't slept properly since that night. Every time I close my eyes, I hear that sound. That soft, deliberate knocking. And sometimes, when everything is silent, when I'm lying in bed, barely breathing, I swear I hear a voice. Low, faint, just beyond the walls. You heard me. I don't know what it was. I don't want to know. But I do know this. That room 807, was never empty. Not before me. Not after me. And if you ever find yourself in a hotel, lying awake in the dark, listening to the air vents, don't listen too closely, because something might be listening back. It all started about 7 years ago when I got a job working night shifts at a warehouse. It wasn't a glamorous gig, but it paid well, and at the time, I needed the money. The warehouse was massive, concrete floors that echoed every step, metal shelves stacked high with boxes, and overhead lights that buzzed faintly. It sat on the outskirts of town, surrounded by an empty lot and a few old buildings that had been abandoned for years. It was the kind of place that felt isolated even when people were around. My shifts usually started at 10 p.m. and lasted until sunrise. The work wasn't difficult, mostly moving inventory, scanning barcodes, and making sure shipments were ready for the trucks in the morning. There were usually only 3 of us working at night. Me, an older guy named Rich, and a younger guy named Kevin. Rich had been working there for over a decade and had this way of making even the most boring tasks entertaining with his stories. Kevin, on the other hand, had just started a few months before me. He was quiet, a little jumpy, but easy to get along with. At first, everything was normal. We had our routine. Get in, grab a coffee from the vending machine, check the task list, and get to work. The warehouse had security cameras, but they were outdated, and half of them barely worked. There was a break room in the back with a fridge, a microwave, and an old couch that smelled like stale fabric. It wasn't much, but during our 3 breaks, it was a lifesaver. The first few weeks were uneventful. The biggest concern we had was keeping ourselves awake during the slow hours. The warehouse had a strange stillness to it at night, like a vacuum where sound barely carried. The only noises were the hum of the overhead lights, the occasional creak of metal racks shifting under the weight of the boxes, and the sound of our own footsteps. One thing I noticed early on was how cold the place got at night. Even in the summer, it always felt a few degrees colder inside. At first, I chalked it up to the high ceilings and concrete walls, but there were moments when the temperature would drop suddenly, making the hairs on my arms stand up. I mentioned it to Rich once, and he just shrugged. "This place has a way of messing with you," he said. I laughed it off, thinking he was just trying to make the night shifts feel less dull. Looking back, I wish I had taken his words more seriously. It was a normal Tuesday night when things first started to feel off. That Tuesday night started just like any other. I clocked in at 10 p.m., grabbed a stale coffee from the vending machine, and met up with Rich and Kevin near the loading dock. The air inside the warehouse felt heavier than usual, colder even. I remember rubbing my arms as I walked through the aisles, telling myself it was just my body adjusting to the night shift again. We split up like always. Rich headed to the inventory room to check stock levels. Kevin started scanning incoming shipments, and I was assigned to reorganize some of the older stock in the back section of the warehouse. That part of the building always felt different. Unlike the front area, where we worked most of the time, the back section was rarely touched. The shelves were packed with boxes covered in dust, some of them so old the labels had faded completely. The overhead lights in that part of the warehouse flickered more often than not, casting strange shadows that stretched across the floor. I started stacking boxes, humming to myself to break the silence. Everything was normal for the first hour or so, but then I heard it. A soft thump. It wasn't loud, just enough to make me pause. It had come from a few aisles over, deeper into the back section. I turned my head, listening, but all I heard was the distant sound of Kevin's scanner beeping and Rich moving pallets near the loading dock. I shook it off and went back to work. A few minutes later, another thump. This time, it was closer. I set the box I was holding down and stepped out of my aisle, peering down the rows of shelves. The warehouse stretched into dimly lit corridors, shadows pressing against the walls. I scanned the area, expecting to see something out of place, maybe a box that had fallen, or Kevin messing around. But everything looked normal. I took a deep breath and went back to stacking. I told myself it was probably just the shelves settling, or maybe a rat knocking something over. Then, a third thump, this time right behind me. I spun around so fast my boots squeaked against the concrete floor. My heart was hammering in my chest. I stared at the space behind me, expecting to see something, but there was nothing there. Just the same boxes, the same shelves, the same dim lighting. I swallowed hard. "Kevin?" I called out. My voice echoed through the aisles. No answer. I felt a cold shiver run down my back. I was done playing around. I grabbed my scanner and walked out of the aisle, making my way toward the front. As soon as I reached the main floor, I spotted Kevin by the loading dock, deep in conversation with Rich. "Were you in the back just now?" I asked, trying to keep my voice steady. Kevin frowned. "No, why?" I hesitated. I didn't want to sound paranoid. "I heard something back there. Thought maybe it was you." Rich raised an eyebrow. "What kind of something?" "Just knocking. 3 times, like someone was moving boxes." Rich exhaled through his nose and glanced toward the back section. "Yeah, sounds about right." That response caught me off guard. "What do you mean?" Rich shrugged. "Warehouse makes noises. You get used to it." I didn't push it, but the way he said it stuck with me. You get used to it. Like this wasn't the first time. The rest of the shift was uneventful, but my nerves stayed on edge. Every little sound felt sharper. Every flicker of the lights made me glance over my shoulder. When my shift finally ended, I practically speed walked to my car. The whole drive home, my mind kept replaying the sounds, the way they had moved, the way they had felt close, even though nothing was there. I told myself it was just my imagination, a draft, a rat, something logical. But deep down, I wasn't so sure. The knocking should have been easy to forget. Maybe if it had only happened once, I could have brushed it off as my imagination. Maybe if Rich hadn't given me that strange look, I wouldn't have thought about it on my drive home, in the shower, or as I lay in bed that morning, struggling to sleep. But I couldn't stop thinking about it. When I came back to work the next night, I made a mental note to keep an ear out for anything unusual. I wasn't scared, just curious. I wanted to prove to myself that there was a reasonable explanation, maybe an old pipe shifting in the walls or a draft from one of the loading docks. But by the end of that shift, I realized something was off, and it was getting worse. That night started like the one before. Rich was in a better mood, cracking jokes as he stacked crates. Kevin was grumbling about how the vending machine had eaten his last dollar. Everything felt normal. Until I went to the back section again. The cold hit me before I even stepped between the shelves. It was sharp, unnatural, like stepping into a freezer. My breath came out in a thin mist, which was impossible. The warehouse wasn't climate controlled, and it was the middle of summer. I stopped in my tracks, rubbing my arms. "Rich," I called over my shoulder. "Does the ace hit back here or something?" He didn't even look up from his clipboard. "No is in this place." I exhaled, watching my breath cloud in front of me. That was when I realized something even stranger. The cold was moving. It wasn't like a steady draft. It was shifting, first near my legs, then creeping up toward my shoulders, like something unseen was brushing past me. I stepped backward, my boots making a dull sound against the concrete. The moment I crossed back into the main section, the cold vanished. Just like that. I turned and stared down the row of shelves. The light flickered once, casting long shadows over the stacked boxes. I took another step back. I wasn't ready to go in there again. I didn't tell Rich or Kevin about what happened. I just kept my head down and finished my tasks. At around 2 a.m., I took a break in the loading bay, sipping a stale coffee. The warehouse felt eerily quiet, too quiet. That's when I heard the scraping. It was a soft sound at first, something shifting against the concrete floor. I set my coffee down, listening. The noise came again, this time louder. It was coming from the back section. I swallowed hard. My instinct told me to ignore it, to not go back there. But my curiosity got the better of me. I grabbed my scanner and walked toward the back. The deeper I went, the heavier the air felt. The cold was back, pressing against my skin like damp cloth. Then I saw it. A single box, sitting in the middle of the aisle. At first, I thought maybe I had left it there earlier. But I knew I hadn't. The last time I was back there, the shelves were neat, untouched. This box hadn't been in the aisle before. I stepped closer. It was a standard shipping box, nothing strange about it. No markings, no labels, just there. I reached out and placed my hand on it. The cardboard was ice cold. Something shifted behind me. I turned so fast I nearly tripped over my own feet. My heart was hammering in my chest, but there was nothing there. I looked back at the box. My fingers tingled against the frozen surface. Then I heard the knocking. 3 slow, deliberate thumps. But this time, they were coming from inside the box. I didn't stick around to see what was in the box. I bolted out of the aisle, nearly knocking over a stack of crates. When I reached the main section, I ran into Rich, who grabbed my arm before I could keep going. "Hey, what the hell, man?" he said, looking half annoyed, half concerned. I took a deep breath, trying to slow my racing heart. Something's back there. Rich's expression shifted. He let go of my arm and studied my face. You saw something? I hesitated. Not exactly, but I heard it, knocking, from inside a box. Rich didn't react the way I expected. He didn't laugh or call me crazy. Instead, he rubbed a hand over his mouth, exhaling through his nose. All right, he said after a moment. Let's check the cameras. We made our way to the security room, a small, windowless space in the back of the warehouse. The monitors were old, the grainy footage flickering in and out. Half of the cameras barely worked, but the one covering the back section was still running. Rich rewound the footage to a few minutes earlier. We watched in silence. At first, the aisle was empty, just rows of shelves and stacks of boxes. Then, without warning, one of the boxes shifted. It didn't fall. It didn't get knocked over. It slid forward, inch by inch, until it sat in the middle of the aisle. I felt my stomach drop. Tell me you see that, I muttered. Rich didn't say anything. Then, on the screen, the box twitched, just slightly, barely noticeable. But then, a shadow moved behind the shelves. It wasn't human. It wasn't anything I could describe. And just as suddenly as it appeared, the feed cut to static. The silence in the room was suffocating. I turned to Rich, my throat dry. What the hell was that? Rich didn't answer right away. He just stared at the screen, his jaw tight. Then he muttered, "Told you. This place makes noises." But this wasn't just noise. Something was in the warehouse, and it was getting closer. The next night, I didn't want to go to work. After seeing that footage, something in me shifted. This wasn't just random noises or a trick of the mind. Something was moving in that warehouse, and it wasn't just shifting boxes around for fun. But I needed the job. Bills don't care if your workplace feels wrong. So, when my shift started, I walked into that building like nothing had changed, like I hadn't seen a shadow move where no person should be, like I hadn't heard knocking come from inside a sealed box. But something had changed. And that night, whatever was in the warehouse was done playing games. The first half of the shift passed in a blur. I kept my head down, did my work, and ignored the tension in my chest. Rich wasn't saying much, and even Kevin, who never stopped complaining about work, was quieter than usual. We all felt it. By 3 a.m., the silence was so thick it was pressing against my ears. The distant hum of the lights, the occasional rustling from the loading bay, everything felt muffled, as if the whole building had been swallowed by something unseen. And then, the power flickered. For a few seconds, the overhead lights dimmed, buzzing weakly before stabilizing again. But when they came back on, something felt different. The air changed. It felt heavier, stale, like the warehouse had been sealed shut, trapping us inside. I turned to Rich. "Did you see that?" He nodded once, his expression unreadable. Kevin stood near one of the workstations, his hands resting on a crate, his face unusually pale. "Maybe a power surge," he said, but his voice was tight, uncertain. Then we heard it. A loud crash. It came from the back section, the place where everything started. For a long moment, none of us moved. Then Rich exhaled sharply. "Let's check it out." I didn't want to. Every instinct in me screamed to stay put. But the way Rich said it, like he already knew we didn't have a choice, made it clear. We had to go. The 3 of us walked toward the back section together. The closer we got, the stronger the cold became. That unnatural, bone-deep chill crawled over my skin, making the hairs on my arms stand up. As we turned the corner into the back aisle, I felt my stomach tighten. One of the shelves had collapsed. Metal beams had bent outward like something had shoved them from the inside. Boxes were scattered across the floor, some torn open. The air smelled stale, almost rotten. Kevin cursed under his breath. "What the hell?" Then the lights flickered again. And this time, when they came back on, I saw it. A shadow. It wasn't cast by anything. It wasn't attached to the shelves or the walls. It was just there, stretching unnaturally across the aisle. And it was moving. Not like a person. Not like anything I had ever seen. It twisted, shifting in ways that didn't make sense, like it was trying to take shape but couldn't quite hold itself together. Then, it turned toward us. Or at least, it felt like it did. A pressure filled the air, thick and suffocating. The kind of weight that makes your chest tighten, makes your body scream to run. The shadow stretched, reaching. And then, from inside the wreckage of the shelves, came a sound that made my blood freeze. A knock. 3 slow, deliberate thumps. Kevin gasped, stepping back. No, man, we need to go. Rich's breathing was uneven. Hold on. But I wasn't waiting. I grabbed Kevin's arm and yanked him backward. Move. We bolted. I don't know if it followed us at first. All I remember is the sound, metal scraping, boxes tumbling. And then, the footsteps. Heavy, deliberate. Not rushed, but steady. Like it knew it didn't need to hurry. Like it knew we weren't getting out. I didn't look back. I couldn't. Every part of me screamed that if I turned around, if I saw what was behind me, something horrible would happen. We burst into the main section of the warehouse, nearly knocking over a workstation. Kevin was gasping, clutching his side. Rich turned, eyes wild. Shut the door. Kevin and I didn't question it. We grabbed the sliding metal gate that separated the back section from the main area and pulled it down. It slammed shut with a dull, echoing bang. For a second, everything was silent. Then the knocking started again. But this time, it wasn't slow. It was pounding. Something was hitting the metal door. Hard. The whole frame rattled. The force of it shook through my bones. Then, it stopped. The silence was worse. We stood there, frozen, waiting. The air was wrong, charged, like static before a lightning strike. Then the lights cut out completely. And in that pitch-black warehouse, I heard breathing. Right behind me. I don't know what happened next. 1 second, I was standing there, my body locked in fear. The next, I was running. I don't remember making the decision to move, but my legs carried me toward the exit, toward the only thing that mattered, getting out. Kevin was ahead of me, practically throwing himself at the emergency door. Rich was right behind me. The second Kevin pushed the bar, the door flew open, and we spilled into the cold night air. I didn't stop. Not until we were at the far end of the parking lot, gasping for breath under the flickering streetlights. The warehouse loomed behind us, silent. No shadow. No movement. Just a dark, empty building. But I knew it was still in there. And it was waiting. We stood in the parking lot, gasping for air, our breath visible in the freezing night. The warehouse loomed behind us, silent and dark, as if nothing had happened. But we knew better. Kevin bent over, hands on his knees, trying to catch his breath. No. No way. I'm done, man. I'm done. Rich just stood there, staring at the building. His face was pale, his hands clenched into fists. I could see the muscles in his jaw tighten like he was trying to process what had just happened. I turned back toward the emergency exit we had just barreled through. The door was still propped open slightly, held ajar by the force with which Kevin had pushed it. A cold draft seeped out from inside, like the building itself was exhaling. But there was no sound now. No footsteps. No knocking. Nothing. Like it was waiting. For a long time, we didn't say anything. What was there to say? None of us wanted to be the first to ask the obvious question. Did that actually happen? Or did we all lose our minds at the same time? But we all knew the answer. Kevin broke the silence first. I'm never going back in there. His voice was uneven, breathless. I don't care what they say. They can fire me. I don't care. I'm done. I wanted to say something reassuring, something rational. But what could I say? Rich ran a hand through his hair, exhaling sharply. We have to tell someone. Kevin let out a humorless laugh. Tell who? The cops? Hey, officer, there's a shadow in our warehouse that knocks on walls and chases people. Yeah, they'll love that. We have to tell management, Rich said firmly. They need to know. They already do, I muttered. Rich and Kevin both looked at me. I swallowed, my mouth dry. You saw the security footage. That thing has been in there for who knows how long. You really think nobody else has noticed? Rich didn't answer right away, but the way his face tensed told me he was thinking the same thing. Kevin shook his head. Then why is this place still open? The answer was obvious. Money. Whatever was in that warehouse wasn't hurting the company's bottom line. As long as shipments went out on time and inventory stayed intact, nobody cared about a few employees quitting or filing complaints about weird noises. That was the worst part. We weren't the first, and we wouldn't be the last. The shift wasn't technically over, but none of us were going back inside. Kevin left first, storming off toward his car without another word. Rich hesitated, glancing back at the warehouse one last time before muttering, "Screw this." He turned and walked toward his own car. I stood there a little longer, staring at the darkened windows, waiting. For what? A sign? A final confirmation that it had been real? Nothing moved, but I felt it. Even from out here, I felt watched. I turned and left. I called in sick the next night. So did Rich. Kevin never came back at all. A few days later, Rich and I met up at a diner across town, neutral ground, somewhere that felt safe. We didn't talk much about it, just sat there drinking bad coffee, staring at our untouched plates of food. But there was something we both needed to ask. Did you ever feel like something followed you home? Rich finally said, his voice quiet. I tensed. Because yes, the first night after we ran, I barely slept. I kept hearing faint noises outside my apartment, soft taps against my window, the sound of something shifting in the darkness. At first, I told myself it was paranoia, that I was just jumpy from everything that had happened. But then, I woke up at exactly 3 a.m. And there, just beyond my bedroom door, I heard it. Knock, knock, knock. Deliberate, slow. I didn't move. I didn't even breathe. I just lay there, frozen, waiting for it to stop. And eventually, it did. Rich exhaled sharply, rubbing his face. I thought it was just me. We never said exactly what we thought, that it got out, that it followed us. But we didn't have to. We both knew. A few weeks later, I found out that the warehouse had hired new staff. They didn't shut it down. They didn't investigate. They didn't do anything. They just replaced us. I wanted to warn the new guys. Tell them to quit before their shifts even started. But what would I say? That there was something inside, something waiting in the dark. That if they heard knocking, they needed to run? They wouldn't believe me. So I did nothing. And to this day, I still wonder, are they hearing the knocking now? Are they standing in that same cold, suffocating air, realizing too late that something is there with them? And if they are, will they make it out? I don't work night shifts anymore. After what happened, I took a job somewhere else. Nothing special, just something that let me work during the day. Sunlight feels safe. Crowded places feel safe. Even now, years later, I don't go near warehouses. Not at night. Not alone. Kevin left town. He never said why, never made a big announcement, just packed up and left. Last I heard, he moved across the country. I don't blame him. Maybe he thought distance would keep him safe. Maybe he just didn't want the reminder. Rich stayed. We don't talk much anymore, but I see his posts online every now and then. He seems fine, normal, but every time we cross paths, there's a moment where we both know. It wasn't just a bad night. It wasn't our imagination. We ran, but it never left. That's the part I still can't wrap my head around. The warehouse never shut down. It didn't even slow down. Trucks still roll in and out, new employees come and go, and nobody outside seems to know anything. I check the news sometimes, half expecting to see a headline. Body found in abandoned warehouse or workers go missing under mysterious circumstances. But there's never anything. No reports. No investigations. Just silence. Like whatever is in there doesn't want attention. Like it's careful. Or worse, like it's patient. I've thought about going back. Not inside, but just to drive by. To see if I still get that same feeling. If it still knows me. But I never do. I tell myself it's because there's no point, that there's nothing left to prove. But the truth? I'm scared. Scared that if I go back, I'll hear it again. Knock, knock, knock. And this time, it won't let me leave. If you've made it this far, you might be wondering, was it real? Did it really happen? All I can say is this. I know what I saw. I know what I felt. And I know that something was in there with us that night. So if you ever find yourself working a late shift, alone in a place that feels too quiet, and if you hear knocking where there shouldn't be, don't check. Don't stay. Just run. This happened a few years ago, but the memory still lingers in my mind like a shadow that refuses to leave. I never considered myself someone who believed in the supernatural. Ghost stories were just that, stories. Things people told around campfires or exaggerated for entertainment. But what I experienced that night in a quiet, unassuming hotel room changed everything. It was late November, and I was on a work trip, the kind where everything felt like a routine. Fly in, attend meetings, sleep in a different bed, fly out. It'd done it so many times that hotel rooms had started to blend together. The same beige walls, identical lamps, that faint scent of industrial cleaning products. But this hotel was different. Not because of how it looked, it was just another mid-range business hotel, but because of what happened inside it. I had landed in the city late that evening, exhausted from back-to-back flights and layovers. The air outside was cold, that kind of crisp, biting chill that sneaks through your coat no matter how tightly you pull it around yourself. I remember standing outside the airport, waiting for a cab, watching my breath form little clouds in the air. The streets were damp from an earlier rain, glistening under the glow of streetlights. Everything felt normal, nothing out of place. The hotel wasn't far from the airport, maybe a 15 minutes drive. I remember the cab driver barely saying a word, just nodding when I gave him the address. That was fine by me. I wasn't in the mood for small talk. When we pulled up to the hotel, I noticed how empty the parking lot was. A few cars were scattered around, but for a place that advertised itself as a business hotel, it seemed oddly quiet. I checked in without any issues. The lobby was well lit, warm compared to the outside, with the faint hum of a TV playing the news in the background. The woman at the front desk gave me a polite but tired smile, sliding my keycard across the counter. "You're in room 306. Elevator's down the hall," she said. I thanked her and headed toward the elevator, my bag slung over my shoulder. The ride up was uneventful, just the quiet hum of the elevator and the soft ding as it stopped on my floor. The hallway was empty, lined with identical doors, each with a small peephole and a silver number plate. The carpet beneath my feet was worn but clean, a deep burgundy color that probably looked more luxurious in the hotel's online photos. Room 306 was near the end of the hall. I slid the keycard in, and the little green light blinked. The door handle turned easily, and I stepped inside. The room was standard, queen-sized bed, a desk with a chair, a flat-screen TV mounted on the wall. A large window on the far side was covered with thick beige curtains. There was a mini fridge in the corner, the usual coffee maker sitting on top of it. The air had that slightly stale but tolerable smell, the kind you get when a room hasn't been aired out in a while. I tossed my bag onto the bed and exhaled, rubbing my eyes. It had been a long day, and all I wanted was to shower, order some food, and sleep. I kicked off my shoes and stretched, rolling my shoulders. The heater under the window clicked on with a low hum, filling the room with warm air. After setting my phone on the nightstand, I grabbed the room service menu from the desk and flipped through it. The options weren't great, but I settled on a turkey sandwich and a bottle of water. While I waited for my food, I decided to take a quick shower. The bathroom was small but clean, with white tiles and a large mirror above the sink. I turned the shower on, letting the water heat up before stepping in. The steam filled the space, fogging up the mirror. It felt good to stand under the water, letting it wash away the exhaustion from the day. When I got out, I wiped the mirror with my hand, staring at my reflection for a moment. My eyes looked tired, dark circles forming under them. I ruffled my hair with a towel and headed back into the room, pulling on a t-shirt and some sweatpants. A few minutes later, there was a knock at the door. Room service. I opened it to find a young guy in a hotel uniform holding my tray. He gave me a nod and handed it over. "Enjoy your meal," he said before turning and walking back down the hall. I locked the door behind me and set the tray on the desk. The sandwich was nothing special, but I ate it anyway, washing it down with a bottle of water. My phone buzzed with an email from my boss about the next morning's meeting. I sighed and typed out a quick reply, setting an alarm for 6:30 a.m. By the time I climbed into bed, it was just past 11. The heater was still humming, and outside, the wind had picked up, rattling against the window. I pulled the blankets up and turned off the bedside lamp. Lying there, staring at the ceiling, I felt a strange sense of unease. Not fear, not yet, just an odd sensation. Maybe it was because I was in an unfamiliar place. Hotel rooms could feel cold, detached, even when they were warm. I told myself it was just my mind playing tricks on me, the exhaustion making me more aware of my surroundings. I turned onto my side, closed my eyes, and tried to fall asleep. And then, just as I was drifting off, I heard it. A faint noise. A sound coming from the air vent near the ceiling. At first, I thought it was just the heater making the metal expand or contract. But then I realized it wasn't coming from the heater. It was coming from inside the vent. A low, almost imperceptible movement. Like something shifting. I opened my eyes, staring at the vent. It was too dark to see anything, but I kept listening. The sound was so faint, I wasn't even sure I had heard it at all. Maybe it was just the building settling, or the winds pushing against the ducts. I closed my eyes again, but right before sleep took me, I heard it once more. A soft, deliberate scraping sound. And then, silence. I stayed still, heart suddenly beating a little faster. I told myself it was nothing, just my imagination. But in the back of my mind, a small voice whispered, "You're not alone in this room." Lying there in the dim hotel room, I kept my eyes fixed on the ceiling, listening. The sound had stopped, but the sense of unease hadn't. My brain was still half asleep, teetering between rationalizing what it just heard and pushing it aside as nothing. Hotels were full of strange noises, pipes groaning, vents shifting, guests moving around in their rooms. I told myself that was all it was. Still, I turned onto my side, eyes darting toward the air vent near the ceiling. It was just a rectangular metal grate, positioned right above the desk. Nothing looked out of place. But in the silence of the room, the memory of that soft scraping sound lingered. I reached for my phone on the nightstand and checked the time. 12:07 a.m. I let out a breath, shaking my head at myself. It was just past midnight, and here I was, spooking myself over nothing. It had a long day. My body was exhausted, and my mind was probably playing tricks on me. Still, I turned on my side to face the wall, trying to settle in. The heater hummed softly. The winds outside continued to press against the windows, and slowly, sleep started creeping back in. Then, just as my breathing began to slow, tap! A single, deliberate tap from inside the vent. I stopped breathing for a second. My entire body stiffened, my eyes snapping open. I wasn't half asleep anymore. I was fully awake now, my pulse thudding in my ears. It had been distinct, sharp enough to be intentional. It wasn't the wind, wasn't the building settling. It had come from inside the vent. I sat up slightly, my eyes locked on the grate. The room was dark except for the faint glow from the digital clock on the nightstand. My throat felt dry, but I swallowed and forced myself to breathe evenly. Maybe it was a mouse, or some kind of small animal that had gotten into the ductwork. That was logical, right? But then, why did it feel wrong? I sat there for what felt like minutes, staring, waiting. The room was completely silent now, aside from the distant sound of a car passing on the street outside. Nothing. I exhaled, forcing myself to relax. It was ridiculous. I was overreacting. Maybe I hadn't even heard it at all. Maybe it was just my brain misinterpreting noises, twisting them into something worse because I was tired. I rubbed my face, flopped back onto the pillow, and pulled the blanket up. "Get some sleep," I muttered under my breath. And I almost did, until I heard it again. Tap, tap, then a long, slow scrape. I shot up in bed so fast my heart nearly exploded in my chest. That wasn't a mouse. The noise was different now. Closer, more deliberate. It was right there, just behind the thin metal of the vent. I stared at it, my breath caught in my throat. The heater kept running, the wind kept pressing against the windows, but those things didn't matter anymore. The only thing that mattered was that I wasn't alone in that room. I grabbed my phone, turning on the flashlight. A cold bluish light flooded the room as I pointed it at the vent. The metal grate was still in place, nothing visibly wrong with it. I swallowed hard, muscles tensed, every nerve in my body screaming at me to move. But I didn't. Instead, I slowly slid out of bed, keeping my eyes on the vent. My bare feet touched the cold floor as I crept forward. Each step felt unnatural, like my body was resisting, telling me I shouldn't get closer. When I was just a few feet away, I stopped. The beam of my phone's light bounced slightly as my hand trembled. Nothing moved. I stood there, barely breathing, waiting. And then the air vent clicked. Not a random creak, not a shift in temperature causing the metal to contract. It sounded like something had tapped it from the inside. I backed up so fast I nearly tripped over my own feet. My heart pounded against my ribs, my breath coming in short, uneven gasps. No! No! That was not normal. That was not something that just happened in an empty hotel room. I scrambled toward the light switch and flipped it on. The overhead light flooded the room with warmth, chasing away the shadows, but it didn't chase away the fear curling in my gut. For a long time, I just stood there, staring at the vent, my pulse hammering. Nothing else happened. No more noises. No movement. The logical part of my brain was trying to shove explanations at me. Maybe it's just air pressure in the vents. Maybe you're so exhausted you're imagining things. Maybe, but the other part of me, the part that had been frozen in place just seconds ago, knew better. Something had tapped on that vent. Something had been moving inside it. I forced myself to take a deep breath, rubbing a hand over my face. I was being ridiculous. Maybe there really was an animal inside. They'd heard of that happening before. Rats, raccoons, birds. Yeah, that had to be it. I hesitated before stepping toward the desk. Keeping one eye on the vent, I sat down, opening my laptop. If there was a rodent or something stuck in the ducts, maintenance needed to know. I pulled up the hotel's website and found the front desk's number. My fingers hovered over the dial button. Then I hesitated. What was I even going to say? Hey, I think there's something moving around in my vent. They'd probably laugh and tell me it was just the heating system. Or worse, they'd come up and check and find nothing, making me look like some paranoid idiot. I sighed, tapping my fingers on the desk. Maybe I just needed sleep. Maybe I wanted there to be something there because it'd been alone too long in a strange room and my brain was turning nothing into something. Still, I wasn't about to sleep with the lights off. I closed the laptop, turned the brightness on my phone down, and crawled back into bed. The heater hummed on, the winds whispered against the windows, and the room settled into its usual silence. But I didn't close my eyes. I stayed awake, staring at the vent, waiting. For what, I wasn't sure. But something told me. It wasn't over yet. I stayed awake longer than I should have, my body curled under the blankets, eyes locked on the vent. The overhead light bathed the room in a dull, artificial glow, making every shadow stretch and shift slightly as the heater kicked on. I told myself I was being stupid. This was just an old building, full of weird noises, nothing more. But I couldn't shake the feeling that something was wrong. I checked the time on my phone. 2:13 a.m. Almost 2 hours since I first heard that sound. The silence stretched, thick and heavy, pressing against my ears. I wanted to believe that whatever happened earlier was just my tired brain playing tricks on me. Maybe the vent had rattled from a change in air pressure. Maybe it imagined the tapping in that hazy space between sleep and wakefulness. But I hadn't imagined the scrape or the deliberate click. I exhaled slowly, forcing myself to breathe evenly. The logical side of my brain told me to sleep, to push aside the paranoia, and stop acting like I was in some horror movie. And then, tap. My stomach clenched. I wasn't crazy. It was real. I sat up so fast the mattress shifted beneath me. The tap had come from the vent again, but this time it wasn't alone. A faint, almost imperceptible shuffling sound followed it. Something moved. My entire body went cold. I threw my legs over the side of the bed, heart slamming in my chest. The light was still on. The room still looked normal, but nothing about this moment felt right. I knew old buildings made sounds, but this was inside the room, right above the desk. It wasn't the pipes or the wind. Something was inside the vent, and it was awake. I took a slow step toward the desk, my mouth dry. My phone's flashlight cast a stark white glow as I pointed it up at the metal grate. The slats of the vent stared back at me, unmoving. Then, click, click, click. I froze. That sound. It was fingernails. I knew it. I knew that rhythmic, unnatural clicking was nails dragging along the inside of the vent. My breath came out in short, shallow gasps. My legs felt stiff, locked in place, but every instinct in me screamed to run. The clicking stopped. For a long, horrible moment, silence took over the room again. Then, in the quiet, something shifted. It was faint, just the softest, almost hesitant movement from inside the vent. I felt the muscles in my legs tighten, a sickening weight pressing into my stomach. I wasn't just imagining it. There was something in there. And then, it breathed. A slow, wet exhale. The sound hit me like ice water, freezing every muscle in my body. No, 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 no. I wasn't alone. My phone nearly slipped from my sweaty grip as I stumbled back, eyes still locked on the vent. I wanted to scream, wanted to run out of the room and never look back, but I couldn't. My body wouldn't move, my mind unable to process the reality of what was happening. And then, the vent shifted. The metal grate bulged outward, just slightly, as if something was pressing its weight against it from the inside. I choked on a breath, my vision narrowing. My brain refused to make sense of what I was seeing. Then it stopped. The pressure against the vent eased, the grate settling back into place as if nothing had happened. And in that moment, the air in the room turned heavy, so thick and suffocating that my lungs ached. I backed up toward the bed, my hands shaking. I needed to do something. I forced myself to move, grabbing my jacket from the chair and throwing it over my shoulders with jerky, frantic movements. I didn't care that it was the middle of the night. I needed to get out. But just as I reached for my bag, a whisper, not the wind, not the heater, a voice, low, ragged, coming from the vent. My blood turned to ice. I didn't hear words exactly, just the shape of them, twisted and mangled, as if someone was trying to speak through a throat clogged with gravel. I bolted. I didn't stop to turn off the light. I didn't stop to grab my things. I just ripped open the door, stepped into the dimly lit hallway, and slammed it shut behind me. My heart pounded so hard I thought I was going to pass out. The hallway was empty. The silence out here felt normal, none of the suffocating weight that had been pressing against me inside the room. I pressed a shaky hand to my face, swallowing hard. I needed to tell someone. I turned on my heel and made my way toward the front desk, my footsteps unsteady. The night receptionist, a young guy with tired eyes, looked up from his computer screen as I approached. "Hey," I said, my voice hoarse. "I need a different room." He blinked. Is there a problem?" I hesitated, glancing over my shoulder. The hallway stretched behind me, empty and quiet. I licked my dry lips. I don't feel comfortable in that one." The receptionist raised an eyebrow, but didn't question it. "All right, let me see what I can do." He started clicking away at his keyboard. "What room are you in?" 314. His fingers froze over the keys. The silence stretched between us, the air suddenly feeling too thick again. Then, carefully, he cleared his throat and gave a tight nod. Yeah, we can move you." Something about the way he said it, so quick, so eager to agree, sent a new wave of nausea rolling through my stomach. I wanted to ask, wanted to demand why he reacted that way. But I wasn't sure I wanted the answer. A few minutes later, he handed me a new key card. "Room 407, he said, barely making eye contact. I took it with a shaky hand, muttering a quiet thanks before turning toward the elevator. As the door slid shut behind me, a thought wedged itself into my mind, one I couldn't ignore. He didn't ask me why I wanted to move. He didn't ask if something was wrong. He just knew. Something was wrong with that room. And I wasn't the first person to leave it. I barely slept. Even in the new room, even with the door locked, my skin felt tight, my nerves raw. Every sound made me flinch, the hum of the heater, the occasional creak from the walls, even my own breathing. I lay there, staring at the ceiling, my mind replaying everything from room 314. The taps, the clicking, the breath, and worst of all, the way the vent pushed outward. I couldn't explain it, and I didn't want to. I just wanted to forget. But as much as I tried to tell myself it was over, that I was in a different room now, far away from whatever that was, my body wouldn't relax. At some point, exhaustion finally dragged me under. I don't know how long I slept, but when I woke up, I wasn't alone. It was subtle at first. The feeling that something wasn't quite right. That eerie awareness of being watched. I shifted under the blankets, my body heavy with sleep, my mind still clawing its way back to consciousness. The room was dark, the only light coming from the neon glow of the alarm clock on the nightstand. 3:42 a.m. For a moment, everything was still. And then, tip, my stomach dropped. No! Not again. I didn't move, didn't breathe. My mind screamed at me to wake up, to do something, but I was frozen. Then it came again. Tap! Click, click, click. No. I wasn't in room 314 anymore. I was in 407. I sat up so fast my vision blurred. My pulse slammed against my ribs, my breath coming out in sharp, uneven gasps. The room looked normal. The desk, the chair, the bathroom door slightly ajar. Nothing seemed out of place. But then I heard it. The sound that made my skin crawl. Scrape! Long, slow, deliberate. And it wasn't coming from the vent. It was coming from the closet. A new kind of fear gripped me, different from before. In room 314, everything had been distant, trapped behind metal slats. This was inside my room. I forced myself to move, swinging my legs off the bed. My bare feet hit the carpet, and for a second, I just sat there, every nerve in my body on fire. The closet door was shut, but something was in there. The air felt thick, heavy, pressing down on my shoulders like a weight. I swallowed hard, my throat dry. This wasn't just old pipes. This wasn't just my imagination. Something had followed me. I reached for my phone, gripping it like a lifeline. My fingers trembled as I flicked on the flashlight, casting a shaky beam of light across the room. I aimed it at the closet door. Nothing. No movement. No sound. I exhaled slowly. Maybe it had been a dream. Maybe. Click. A small, sharp sound, just barely audible over my own breath. My fingers tightened around the phone. That wasn't from the closet. It was behind me. I turned slowly, every muscle locked in place, heart hammering so loud it drowned out everything else. The vent above the bed was open. I don't remember opening my mouth, but suddenly I was screaming. The vent's cover was gone, and something was inside. Something huge. A shape, dark and twisted, half hidden in the shadows. Long, bony fingers gripped the edges of the vent as it pulled itself out. The room tilted. My vision blurred, my breath caught in my throat. It was wrong. Its arms were too thin, the joints bending at unnatural angles. The fingers, longer than they should be, curled against the wall, nails scraping against the plaster. Its face, or what should have been its face. There was nothing. Just smooth, pale skin stretched tight over a skull-like shape. No eyes, no nose, just a wide, gaping mouth. I couldn't move, couldn't breathe. It clicked its nails against the wall, tilting its head slightly, as if studying me. Then it crawled out. The motion was slow, deliberate, the way a spider moves when it knows its prey has nowhere to run. My stomach lurched. It wasn't standing. It was crawling. I scrambled back onto the bed, my body shaking so violently I could barely keep hold of my phone. My mind screamed at me to run, but I couldn't take my eyes off it. It moved across the ceiling like it belonged there, like it had done this before. And then, it spoke, a sound that didn't belong in this world, a dry, guttural whisper that wasn't made for human ears. But somehow I understood. You shouldn't have switched rooms. The words slammed into me like a punch to the gut. My vision swam, my chest constricting like something was squeezing my lungs. I opened my mouth to scream, but it was already dropping. I threw myself off the bed just as it landed. The mattress groaned under its weight, the frame shaking as those two long fingers dug into the sheets. I hit the floor hard, pain shooting up my leg. My phone skidded across the carpet, the flashlight flickering wildly. The thing turned its head toward me. Its mouth stretched open. Too wide. Way too wide. Something moved inside. Something wrong. I lunged for the door. My fingers fumbled with the lock, my mind screaming faster, faster, faster. And then, a hand closed around my ankle. Cold. So cold. I kicked, my foot connecting with something solid, and then I was free. I didn't look back. I ripped the door open and ran. The hallway was empty, dead silent. I bolted toward the elevator, jamming the button over and over, my breath coming in short, panicked gasps. My body burned with terror, my legs unsteady beneath me. The door slid open. I stumbled inside, slamming the close button so hard my fingers hurt. For a horrible second, I thought I saw something at the end of the hall, something thin and pale, crouched near my door. Then the elevator doors shut. I collapsed against the wall, my body shaking violently. I didn't stop, didn't breathe. I just rode the elevator down, gripping the railing like it was the only thing keeping me tethered to reality. I couldn't stay here. I had to get out, had to leave, because whatever was in room 314 had followed me, and it wasn't alone. The elevator doors slid open, but I didn't move. I just stood there, gripping the railings so tightly my knuckles ached, my breath coming in short, ragged bursts. My whole body shook. The lobby was empty. No front desk clerk, no guests, no sounds except the faint hum of the vending machines near the entrance. Everything felt wrong, like I had stepped into a different version of reality, one where time had slowed, where the world had tilted just slightly off balance. I forced myself to step out of the elevator. My bare feet hit the cold tile, sending a fresh wave of dread through me. I had left everything behind, my shoes, my bag, my wallet. None of that mattered. I had to leave. The front doors loomed ahead, a massive wall of glass leading to the dark, empty street outside. My legs felt like they barely belonged to me as I stumbled forward. Every step was a struggle, my muscles tight with exhaustion and terror. The automatic doors didn't open. I stopped, blinking at my reflection in the glass. My face was pale, eyes sunken, lips pressed so tightly together they had almost lost all color. I waved a hand in front of the sensor. Nothing. A cold panic surged up my spine. I pressed my palms against the glass, pushing hard. The doors didn't budge. I wasn't trapped. I couldn't be trapped. My breath hitched as I turned back toward the front desk, my mind scrambling for another way out. There had to be an emergency exit. A side door. Something. Then I heard it. Tap! A single, deliberate sound. The hairs on my arms stood on end. It came from the hallway, from the direction of the elevator. My stomach clenched, my pulse hammering against my ribs as I took a slow step back. Tap, tap, tap. Closer. I swallowed hard, my throat dry, my mind screaming at me to run, to hide, to do anything but stand here like a target. Then, silence. The air in the lobby felt thick, pressing against my skin like something tangible. I turned my head, just slightly, just enough to see. The hallway was empty. The elevator doors were open, but nothing stood inside. Nothing I could see. But I felt it. The same way I had felt it in room 314. The same way I had felt it in 407. Watching. Waiting. I took another step back, my heel bumping against the base of the front desk. And that's when I saw it. The guest book. A thick, leather-bound log sitting on the counter next to an old-fashioned pen on a chain. I wouldn't have given it a second glance, except it was open. The last entry was mine. My name, scrawled hastily from when I checked in. Room 314. But below that, there were other names. A dozen. More. All crossed out. All except one. I barely registered what I was doing as I leaned closer, my breath fogging up the counter. Room 407. My stomach twisted into knots. That was my new room. That was me. I was the last name. The only name that wasn't scratched out. I felt a rush of nausea, my head spinning, my vision going fuzzy at the edges. My fingers clenched the counter as I forced myself to look at the entry before mine. The name was crossed out, but the room number wasn't. 314. The realization hit me like a freight train. Whoever stayed in room 314 last moved to 407, just like me. And now their name was gone. A hollow, creeping terror spread through my chest. This wasn't just a haunted room. It was something else. Something worse. I wasn't just a guest. I was a replacement. My throat tightened, my breathing coming in short, painful gasps. I needed to get out. Now. I turned, ready to sprint for the side hallway, for the emergency exit, for anything that would get me out of this place. And then I saw it. A reflection in the glass. Standing behind me. not human. A shape, twisted and elongated, its limbs bending at sickening angles. The skin, pale, stretched tight over its frame. No eyes, just a wide, grinning mouth. Right behind me. I ran. I don't remember my feet hitting the floor. I don't remember shoving through the side door or how I even knew where to go. I just remember the feeling, that cold breath on my neck. I didn't stop. Not when I hit the street. Not when I nearly collapsed on the sidewalk. Not when I flagged down a passing car, screaming, begging them to help me. I left everything behind. My bag, my shoes, my name on that list. I never looked back. And I never went back. I checked online a few weeks later. The hotel was gone. Not closed, gone. No records, no listings. The address led to an empty lot, like it had never existed. But I know the truth. I know what I saw. And sometimes, late at night, when I'm lying awake, I wonder if someone else checked in after me. If another name was written under room 407, if it's still out there, waiting, watching, looking for the next guest. I never went back to that hotel. After that night, I grabbed my bag from the lobby, got in my car, and drove. I didn't care that it was still dark outside, that I hadn't checked out properly, or that I had nowhere specific to go. I just needed to get away. The moment I hit the highway, I felt like I could breathe again. But I didn't stop. Not for coffee, not for gas, not even to process what had happened. I kept going until the sun came up, until the hotel was nothing but a distant memory in my rearview mirror. And even then, I didn't feel safe. It's been months now. I moved to a new city, changed my number, and threw away everything I had from that trip, including the clothes I wore that night. I wanted to erase every connection I had to that hotel, to room 314, to whatever was in the vents. But some things don't let you go. The first time I noticed it, I was lying in bed, trying to fall asleep. The apartment was silent, the glow of my phone screen the only light in the room. Then, from somewhere in the darkness, tap. My heart nearly stopped. I sat up, ears straining, my breath caught in my throat. The sound had been soft, almost too soft to notice. Then, tap. It was coming from the air vent. I told myself it was nothing, just the building settling or the ace kicking in. I forced myself to ignore it, to close my eyes and will my body to relax. And maybe I would believe that. Maybe I could convince myself that it was just my imagination, if it weren't for the whisper that followed.